Hey guys, and welcome back to Recording Guitar at Home. Thank you so much for joining me again. Now, in our previous lesson, we talked all about microphones. We talked about condenser microphones, dynamic microphones, ribbon microphones. We listened to sound samples of each to kind of get an idea for the tone of each of these different types of microphones. And of course, we talked about good, affordable options for each type that you guys can buy on your own to add to your collection to use for your recordings. Now, in this lesson, we're going to move along kind of still looking at the big picture of everything that we need to be ready to really start recording amazing quality guitar in our very own home. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about spaces, rooms. We're going to be talking a little bit about how we can set up a room, how we can choose a room that we know is going to sound really, really good to record in. It's going to be a bit of a shorter lesson because there are just some very basic guidelines that we're going to come over, but it's just, just as important as the mic and the audio interface and your speakers, all this kind of stuff. It's important to have a really great space to work in, a space that sounds good, especially if we're recording something like an acoustic guitar. You want the room to sound nice. We also want to make sure that our room is, clean and ready to go and organized, that we have taken care of any major acoustic issues in the room. They're going to make things harder or make things sound worse for our recording. So let's go ahead and just dive in by talking about what types of rooms are really good for recording in a common home. Now, I'm going to talk about these rooms kind of assuming that you watching this are either in an apartment or a house, okay? Kind of a typically designed, typically built apartment or house. We're not going to be talking about any specially built spaces. We're not going to be talking about buying expensive acoustic treatment like the kind of stuff that you see behind me. You really don't need to worry about any of that. I am, at the end of this lesson, going to give you some quick tips and tricks that you can do to kind of emulate spaces that are purpose-built for music. But we'll get to that in a little bit. The first thing that we want to worry about is just where in our home should we record? Should we do it in the living room, in the kitchen, in a bedroom? What's best? Well, there's a few things to consider. The number one thing that I always think about is noise. Where in your home is quietest? Where in your home is most kind of reserved, set back away from the hustle and bustle? Whether you have kids or a spouse or neighbors, is there a room in your home that's kind of away from all of that? Typically, this would be maybe a bedroom, maybe an office type space. Those are going to be better options than, say, a living room or a kitchen. Now, the other factor to really consider here is room acoustics. And this has to do with the size and the shape of the room. Now, generally speaking, rooms with all right angles for walls, which almost every home in the world is built with, are actually not super ideal for recording. They can be fine, but big problems happen when you have parallel walls facing each other on all sides. This problem is especially bad when the room is square. So if you have a room that is a 12-foot by 12-foot square and just has these big flat parallel walls, especially if it has low ceilings, and even worse if it has hardwood floors, that room is going to sound very bad. You're going to have what we call reflections, which is where the sound starts bouncing around. And when you have reflections in 3 dimensions, from wall A to wall B, wall C to wall D, and then from the floor to the ceiling, if you have hardwood floors, you have 3 different sets of reflections, or what we would more specifically call flutter echoes. They're going to create some very unpleasant overtones in your recording. So if possible, I always like to choose a room that is shaped sort of unusually. The more different angles and surfaces in your room, the better. For recording purposes, I personally like carpeted floors when we're just recording at home because it reduces reflections. Now, in a lot of big recording studios, you will see that they have hardwood floors. So you might go, oh, wow, that's great. I have hardwood floors in my home. But the important thing to remember is that recording studios are purpose-built to sound as good as possible. And reflections are very, very pleasing when they're done in the right way. And that's how recording rooms are actually engineered, is to have every wall and every surface be at an odd angle, so sound is never bouncing back and forth. It's simply getting diffused throughout the room. That sounds very pleasing. However, in your typical, again, a bedroom or something that is a square, angled off room with hardwood floors, it's especially bad when you don't have much art or furniture in that room. It actually can sound very, very unpleasant. So, again, thinking about rooms that are quiet, rooms that are carpeted, rooms that are away from the hustle and bustle of the house, and rooms that have as many kind of architectural features as we can have. If they have a kind of chambered roof or cathedral ceilings, that's wonderful. If they have any kind of a ceiling with an odd angle, that's wonderful. If they have any protruding bookshelves, built-ins, closets, anything like that, those are all going to be good because they're going to help to break up the reflections of the sound. Now, another thing that I can recommend to you, more in the realm of acoustic treatment, would be something that's very, very simple. And that is actually, if you are, kind of go into the room that you're planning to record in and you just clap once or twice and really listen and think about how the reverberance of that clap sounds in the room. If it sounds ringy, if it sounds pingy, that's not good. We don't like that. If it sounds nice and even and dispersed and kind of white noise-ish, that's good. That means that your room is going to sound very, very nice. However, if your only option for a room to record doesn't sound great, well, what do? Well, the easiest solution, to be honest with you, is actually just to take a heavy comforter and tack it up on the wall. There's audio professionals out there that will disagree with me on that point, but in terms of just getting a decent quality recording at home, this is one of the easiest and simplest things that you can do in a room that has problems with too many reflections or sounds ringy or something like that. Just hang up a couple of blankets. Especially if you can clap and listen and hear that ring is happening specifically between a set of walls, let's say the wall on your right and the wall on your left, put the blankets there. Then turn, clap again, and if it's not as bad the other direction, you don't need to worry about it. Whenever you hear that kind of ringiness, again, what we would call a flutter echo in acoustics, hanging a blanket or two on either side of the room can do wonders for helping to deaden the room down a little bit and make it better for recording. Now, obviously, we're talking about finding a room that's kind of away from the home, away from the hustle and bustle for noise purposes, so that we don't have other noises, whether it's road noise from your street out front, whether it's the kids playing in the living room, TVs, neighbors, whatever that may be. Obviously, these things can kind of pollute our recordings. Very important. However, recording is a complex process. It takes a lot of focus. It takes a lot of planning. And for me, when I have a space that is away from that hustle and bustle, away from the core of the home, it just helps with my mindset. It helps with being able to really focus in on the idea of really just making sure my recordings are as good as they can be. I can get myself into a flow, once whatever else needs to be done for the day is already done, I can just kind of retreat and really turn my whole mind to focusing on the recording process. It's much easier to do that in a back room, an office space where you can close the door, be away from the world for a little while, than it is to do that in a more public space, like a living room, for instance. When you're out in the middle of the home, it's very easy to get distracted by, oh, shoot, I need to clean the kitchen, or, need to go do whatever. It's much easier to get distracted that way. And when we dedicate ourselves a little bit of space, even if it's not the only purpose of the room that we're talking about, it can be a setup in your bedroom that you normally sleep in, but having it away from kind of the rest of the cares of the world can go a long way in helping you to focus and really accomplish a lot when you sit down to actually start recording. So the last thing that I want to talk about just real quick is guitar amps, because guitar amps are a little bit different. Everything I've talked about up to this point is really applicable for when we're recording acoustic guitar, when we're recording vocals, and when we're setting up our equipment to listen back on speakers, kind of do all that type of work. Guitar amps, you absolutely can just stick in the middle of a room, and they will generally sound really good. However, another great trick with guitar amps that will help you get an even more focused sound is to put them in a closet. Now, it can be really any closet as long as it's big enough to hold the amp itself and a microphone. It's going to be fine. And actually, closets that already have some clothes in them can be wonderful because those clothes are going to provide a lot of sound kind of dampening, and they're going to absorb a lot of sound from the amp itself. This is great for a couple of reasons. It's going to help control the sound that goes into the microphone so you don't have any unwanted reflections. It's just focused strictly on the tone of your amp. But it's also going to help with kind of bleed to the outside world. This is especially important if you live in something like an apartment, condo, townhome where you have neighbors in very close proximity. Sticking your amp in a closet is going to go a long way to helping you be able to turn it up a little bit, maybe crank it a little bit more, have a little bit more fun without bothering and upsetting those around you. It's going to contain the sound again, especially if it has some clothes in it. That's going to help to absorb a lot of the sound that comes out of the amp. So it's going to hit the mic, then go out and get soaked up by those clothes and kind of reverberate around in that one very small space. And then you're not going to have to worry about it from there. So my recommendation for an amp, stick it in a closet, whether it's a walk-in, whether it's a kind of a normal, more shallow sliding closet. As long as you've got room for the mic and the amp, you should be in good shape. Now, the very last thing I'll say is that wherever you may be setting all this stuff up, whichever room in your home you're using, it's important to always keep our space clean and organized. When you're done with your session for the day, disconnect your cables, wrap them up, store them somewhere appropriate, tear down your microphones. I mean, unless you're in the middle of actively working on a project for days at a time, then of course it's easier to leave them set up. But it's always a really, really great idea to just clean your space up, tear everything down at the end of the time that you're working. For me, this is kind of like a little bit of a Zen ritual. When I'm done working in my studio for the day, I clean up. I wrap my cables, I put my drumsticks away, I put my guitars back on their stands. A cluttered space can lead to a cluttered mind, as the saying goes, and it's very, very true in the recording studio. If you've got soda cans and dishes and kind of cables going every which way, and your guitar is leaned up precariously against something else, that's going to create a headspace in your studio that might be a little bit more stressful than it needs to be. It's not going to feel clean. It's not going to feel polished. I like my studio like it is now, which is clean, tight, nice. And I come in here to work, I may make a big mess. Maybe I'm doing sound effects for a video game and end up chopping up a bunch of fruit or something crazy. I do all kinds of weird stuff in here. But, at the end of the day, cleaning things up and kind of resetting the space back to zero is incredibly important to me. It's a nice process to close out a day of work. And I know that when I walk in the following day or the next time that I need to go in and work on something, I'm coming into a clean space and I can focus on exactly what I need to focus on, which is getting some recording done. I'm not worried about cleaning up. I'm not worried about tripping over things or knocking over instruments. Keeping a clean space is just very, very conducive to a good workflow overall. Okay, guys, so there's a quick kind of overview and some ideas and recommendations in terms of spaces for recording, right? We want it away from the hustle and bustle of the home. We want it in a private, quiet area of the home. We talked about it, the one thing that you can do to help it if your room doesn't sound very, very good. Talking about recording electric, recording acoustic, it's all part of this bigger picture, right? It's all part of getting into recording our very own music. So if you've got your space selected and kind of set up the way that you want it, we're going to move along into the next lesson where we're actually going to begin the process of setting up our song. We're going to talk about kind of getting ourselves ready to start recording, getting everything connected, and then we're actually going to jump into the computer and get our song session set up and ready to record an acoustic guitar part, an electric guitar part, and a bass guitar part. So if that all sounds good, you've got your space picked out and are ready to go, we will go ahead and move along to the next lesson. We'll see you there.